It began with an unthinkable horror hidden in plain sight. Months of normal life, tainted by something unspeakable, buried just beneath the surface. What should have been a new beginning, a dream home built on years of hard work, instead unearthed a nightmare that had lain silent for 7 agonizing years. In mid-May of 2022, the city of Vinh, Nghệ An, was already sweltering, even in the morning mist. Marcus Le, a 32-year-old mechanical engineer, had poured his life savings into a 90-square-meter plot of land in Hung Binh Ward. This was his dream, the foundation for a peaceful future for his family. On that fateful morning, a 4-man construction crew began digging the foundations for his new home. Marcus watched with a hopeful heart as the excavator diligently scraped away layers of rich red earth. He had bought the land from an elderly woman named Helen Huang, who had sold it quickly and at a surprisingly low price, nearly 15% below market value, to move to the U.S. with her children. Marcus had considered it a stroke of luck, a blessing from above. Then, at approximately 10:15 a.m., a blood-curdling scream pierced the air from the far corner of the plot. "Mr. Lay, come quick! It looks like human bones!" Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs as he rushed over. His eyes were fixated on the shallow pit, less than a meter deep. There, a dark, discolored arm bone lay exposed, still wrapped in a piece of decaying green nylon rope. Moments later, fragments of a deep red fabric, unmistakably part of a dress, were pulled from the damp soil. The entire construction crew stood frozen, speechless, as an indescribable, acrid odor of decay began to permeate the air. With trembling hands, Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed the police. By 10:45 a.m., the Vinh City Police, in coordination with Hung Binh Ward Police, had arrived, swiftly sealing off the scene. Criminal investigation forces, forensic experts, and elite technical units were immediately dispatched. Colonel Benjamin Hung, deputy head of the Nghệ An Provincial Criminal Police Department, personally took charge of the excavation. After nearly 2 meticulous hours of work, at a depth of 1.2 meters, authorities uncovered an almost complete female skeleton. The victim's body was found with both hands and feet bound, her mouth stuffed with a large wad of cloth. Her skull showed signs of severe fracture. Around the remains, investigators also discovered a pair of decayed high-heeled shoes, a woman's leather wallet, and a broken gold chain. Initial forensic examination concluded that the victim had died approximately 5 to 7 years prior. The cause of death was most likely a severe traumatic brain injury caused by an extremely powerful blunt force. The position of the body spoke volumes. This was undeniably a murder, not a suicide or an accident. The shallow, hasty burial indicated that the perpetrator had acted in a desperate rush, attempting to conceal their heinous crime as quickly as possible. A young forensic expert quietly approached Colonel Hung. "Colonel," he murmured, "she was wearing a red dress. It looks as if she was preparing for a party or even her own wedding day." Colonel Hung carefully jotted down every detail in his notepad. He scanned the surrounding land, then turned to his team. "Immediately review all missing persons cases in Vinh City and surrounding districts," he commanded, focusing on the period between 2015 and 2017. Cross-reference with the victim's identifying characteristics. No one at that moment could have known that a missing persons case, one that had once stirred the entire Quang Nam ward 7 years prior, was about to be reopened by these ominous red dress fragments. Early on the morning of May 18, 2022, in the small meeting room at the Criminal Police Department, Colonel Benjamin Hung meticulously leafed through old files on missing persons cases from 2015 to 2017. Names and faces blurred past, but one case stood out with chillingly precise details. Anna Tran, born in 1994, disappeared on January 18, 2015, mere hours before her wedding ceremony was scheduled to begin. According to archived records, Anna Tran had lived with her mother in an alley on Phan Boi Chau Street in Quang Nam Ward. She worked at a beauty salon and was described as gentle and kind. Her fiancé was Daniel Nguyen, born in 1990, the only son of the prominent owners of a well-known gold shop in the city. Their wedding was set for 5 p.m. on January 18, 2015. However, around 2 p.m. that day, Anna Tran vanished after telling her mother she was going out to pick up her wedding dress, which had just undergone its final alterations. She was never seen again. Her family immediately reported her disappearance to the police, launching a desperate search. Posters were plastered everywhere, but all efforts were in vain. Not a single trace of her was found. 3 months later, the case was temporarily closed, concluded as a disappearance with unknown causes. What was particularly strange was the remarkably swift actions of Daniel Nguyen's family. They hastily dismantled the wedding marquee, closed their gold shop for a period, and within months sold their house and moved away. Only Anna's mother, Laura Tran, remained in their old home, living a silent, shadow-like existence for 7 long years. At 10 a.m. on May 18, 2022, Colonel Hung, accompanied by Major Andrew Lay, a seasoned investigator, arrived at Laura Tran's house to deliver the devastating news about the discovered remains. Laura, now over 60, her hair completely white, lived alone in her old, modest house. She froze, her frail body trembling as the words sank in. Are you saying my daughter is dead?" Tears streamed down her hollow cheeks. "I have waited for her for 7 years. I always thought she had been tricked, sold across the border, or that something else had happened. I never imagined she would be buried right here in Vinh." Colonel Hung gently showed her images of the gold chain found with the remains. Laura Tran nodded, her voice choked with sobs. "Yes, it's hers. I gave her this chain for her 20th birthday." That same afternoon, detectives honed in on the information regarding the plot of land where Anna's body was found. A chilling coincidence emerged. The land had previously belonged to Daniel Nguyen's family, specifically his father, Michael Nguyen. They had sold it to Helen Huang in 2019, 4 years after they had moved away. The logic of the case became starkly clear. If Anna Tran was murdered and buried in 2015, at that time, the land had still been owned by the groom's family. This revelation ignited a series of sharp questions in Colonel Hung's mind. Did Daniel's family know something about Anna's death? Why did they sell the land at a reduced price and leave so quickly after the wedding was called off? What secret had been deliberately buried for 7 years? That very night, a summons for Daniel Nguyen was issued. According to residential records, Daniel was now living in Hanoi, working as a sales executive for a large car showroom. A missing bride, a canceled wedding, a skeleton beneath a foundation, and now it was time for all deadly silences to be shattered. At 9 a.m. on May 19, 2022, a car bearing license plate 29 pulled up and stopped in front of the Nha An Provincial Police Headquarters. Daniel Nguyen, the man who had stood beside Anna Tran in their wedding photos 7 years earlier, stepped out, his face grim. Daniel, now 32, was immaculately dressed, with fair skin and an almost scholarly appearance, yet his eyes held an inexplicable evasiveness. In an office on the 2nd floor, Colonel Benjamin Hung placed a file containing gruesome crime scene photos in front of Daniel. "Mr. Nguyen," the colonel began, his voice firm, "these female remains were found on the land your family owned before 2019. Our initial verification strongly suggests this is Chern Hoai An, your fiancé, who disappeared in 2015. Do you have anything to declare?" Daniel froze for a few seconds, then shook his head frantically. I truly know nothing. I still can't understand Anna's disappearance. At the time, I called and searched everywhere for her. My family thought she had run off with someone else, which is why we decided to call off the wedding." "Then do you know she was bound hand and foot, had rags stuffed in her mouth, and was buried right on your family's land?" Daniel's throat tightened. Colonel Hung gave him no time to compose himself, pressing on. "According to our investigation, Anna left her house at 2 p.m. to go to the wedding dress shop, but she never arrived. Security cameras from a nearby house captured images of a red scooter carrying her away from the alley. The driver was a man in a white shirt. Do you know anyone who owned a red scooter at that time? I had one, but my friend borrowed it that day. I lent it to someone named Thomas. Thomas Huang, an old school friend of mine, occasionally visited my house. Major Andrew Lay immediately rose, quietly noting the name in his book. Thomas Huang, he stated, verify immediately. At 11:30 a.m. that same morning, a team of detectives approached the residence of Thomas Huang. He was currently working as a motorbike mechanic, temporarily residing in a ward in Kurlo Town. Thomas had no prior criminal record, but his statements were vague and evasive. When asked about the red scooter he borrowed from Daniel on January 18, 2015, Thomas appeared flustered. I did borrow the scooter, but that day I only took it to get it repaired for Daniel. I had nothing to do with anything else. His answer was clearly unconvincing. By the afternoon of May 19, 2022, the forensic report from the Ministry of Public Security's Criminal Science Institute arrived. The DNA test results of the skeleton matched completely with a hair sample from Laura Tran, confirming with 100% certainty that the victim was indeed Anna Tran. Red paint residue found on the nylon wrap around the victim's body also matched the type of paint used on a 2014 Honda Airblade scooter. Simultaneously, a technical report from the forensic team pointed out an anomaly. The victim's skull had a circular indentation, approximately 3.5 centimeters in diameter, perfectly consistent with a hard object like the handle of a sledgehammer or an iron shovel. The angle of the wound suggested the assailant attacked from behind, when the victim was completely unsuspecting. These disparate pieces of evidence quickly intertwined, forming a new investigative direction. The victim had been lured out of her home by an acquaintance, then brutally killed with a heavy object. The perpetrator had bound her hands and feet, stuffed rags in her mouth, and then hastily buried her. The assailant must have been someone who could easily access the land owned by Daniel's family. At 8 p.m. that same day, at police headquarters, after 6 hours of intense psychological interrogation, Daniel Nguyen began to change his story. He confessed, "Anna and I had a fierce argument that day. I found out she was still messaging her ex-boyfriend. I was furious, but I swear I didn't kill her. I just called Thomas and asked him to take Anna somewhere to scare her a little. I never imagined." Daniel's voice trailed off, his face ashen. Colonel Hung tightened his grip on his pen. "Never imagined or never dared to admit? Do you think 7 years buried underground could cover up all your sins?" Daniel fell silent. In the hallway, a young detective rushed in, handing Colonel Hung a freshly printed stack of photos. These were images extracted and enhanced from security cameras in a residential area near the crime scene, captured on the afternoon of January 18, 2015. A man in a white shirt, his face blurry but his physique remarkably similar to Daniel Nguyen's, was pushing a wheelbarrow carrying a large sack towards the back of his family's property. On May 20, 2022, the grainy image from the old security camera became one of the few crucial pieces of evidence remaining after 7 years. Despite its low resolution, the tall, slender figure, and especially the distinct bow-legged gait, were unmistakable. Major Andrew Lee sketched the image and proceeded to compare it with Thomas Huang, the friend Daniel claimed had borrowed his scooter on the day of the murder. Surprisingly, the figure in the photo matched Thomas by 90%, not Daniel. At 10 a.m., the detective team returned to Thomas Huang's house. This time, they came armed with an emergency search warrant. Thomas's small house was cluttered, reeking of oil and grease. After more than 40 minutes of thorough searching, they discovered an old Nokia phone with a shattered screen, meticulously hidden behind a layer of old roof tiles at the back of the house. The recovered data from the phone contained only 6 final text messages. One of them read, "Remember, just scare her. Don't do anything reckless. I don't want to be involved in anything." The message was sent from a number identified as Daniel Nguyen's. Connecting all the clues, the investigation team formally detained Thomas Huang. Under the weight of irrefutable evidence, Thomas finally broke down, confessing to his entire crime. That day, I only intended to drive Anna to an empty lot to scare her, to tell her not to embarrass Daniel in front of everyone. But Anna argued back fiercely. She said she would cancel the wedding and accuse Daniel of having beaten her before. I lost control. I saw the shovel leaning against the wall. I took the handle and hit her on the head. Then I buried her immediately. I was so scared, so very scared. Did Daniel know at that time? Colonel Hung asked directly. Thomas shuddered. No, he only wanted me to talk to her gently. I didn't dare to tell him anything afterwards. But I knew if I confessed the truth, both he and I would be finished. On the afternoon of May 20, when confronted directly with Thomas's confession, Daniel Nguyen completely collapsed. I never wanted Anna to die. I loved her. But I was pressured by my family, by my pride. When Thomas told me it was done, I vaguely understood everything. But I didn't dare to report it to the police. I let the truth sink. And then we sold the land and left Ngayon, trying to forget her. Yes, my father. He didn't want the family to be implicated. He said, "The dead are dead. Let them rest. If you say anything, this whole family will die with you." For 7 years, I have lived like a man condemned to death every single day. On the same day, an order was issued to formally charge and arrest Thomas Huang for murder. Daniel Nguyen was initially charged with failing to report a crime. Later that night, in his office, Colonel Hung gazed thoughtfully at the case board. A colleague inquired, "This case is closed, isn't it, Colonel?" Colonel Hung shook his head. "Not yet. I still have one question. How did Thomas know exactly when and where Anna would be? Someone orchestrated this. The investigation cannot stop." Early on the morning of May 21, 2022, the sky over Vin City was overcast, heavy with moisture. In the Criminal Investigation Unit's office, Colonel Benjamin Hung had not left his desk since the previous night. Something felt wrong. The case seemed closed, with Thomas Huang, the direct perpetrator, confessing, and Daniel Nguyen, the enabler, bowing his head in guilt. Yet a small detail continued to gnaw at him. Why would Thomas, an ordinary man with no money or power, dare to drive the daughter of a well-off family to an empty lot, assault her, and then boldly bury her body right on Daniel's family's land, without fear of detection? Who had stood behind him, helping him cover up every trace for 7 long years? At 9 a.m., a reconnaissance team was dispatched to Ben Thuy Ward to invite Michael Nguyen, Daniel Nguyen's father, for questioning. At 10:15 a.m. in the interrogation room, Michael Nguyen, 64 years old, short and stocky, with dark skin and thinning gray hair, appeared. He was a well-known construction team leader in Ngayon, highly knowledgeable about geology and construction. When asked about the land sale, he answered calmly, "I sold that plot of land in 2019 because I had no need for it. Why are you asking so many questions?" Colonel Hung placed 2 photos on the table. One was the crime scene photo of the excavated remains from 2022. The other was a blueprint of the underground drainage system of a construction project he had supervised in 2015, extracted from the permit application to repair the very same land's fence. "You had the fence repaired in June 2015, just 2 weeks after Anna Tran disappeared," Colonel Hung stated. "What's strange is that you not only rebuilt the fence, but also poured a thick layer of concrete slab precisely where we later discovered the remains. Why, Mr. Nguyen?" Michael Nguyen briefly froze, then spoke in a raspy voice. It was me. It was me. I suspected something was wrong. That day, Daniel came home, his face as pale as a banana leaf. I pressed him, and he finally cried, saying Thomas had accidentally done something. I only thought it was an injury. But then I went to the back of the property to check and saw a newly dug mound of earth with distinct wheelbarrow tracks. I dug into the soil and saw a sack, but I didn't dare to look inside. Colonel Hung narrowed his eyes. You suspected it might be a human body, but you didn't report it to the police. Michael Mynn's voice grew hoarse, his eyes bloodshot. I once witnessed my own brother spend 15 years in prison for involvement in a manslaughter case. Our entire family was shattered by it. I didn't want my only son to follow that path. I had workers pour concrete, relaying the cement slab over it. I just wanted to bury this story along with that land. That afternoon, Michael Nguyen's confession stunned the entire investigative team. This case was no longer a simple murder and concealment of a body, but a prolonged and organized chain of acts to cover up a crime. Additional charges were immediately issued. Michael Nguyen was charged with concealing a crime and destroying evidence. Daniel Nguyen's charge was upgraded from failing to report a crime to concealing a crime. Thomas Huang was additionally charged with desecration of a corpse. Colonel Hung closed the case file, his voice somber. No death is ever in vain. Conscience will always be a living witness, haunting the guilty for the rest of their lives. On May 22, 2022, the Nha An Provincial Police held a formal press conference, transparently announcing the entire investigation process to the media. Local residents, already abuzz since the discovery of the remains, were now even more aghast to learn that the victim's family and the perpetrator's family had once been on the verge of becoming in-laws. A tragedy had been buried by false honor, by pride, and by the cruelly cold indifference of adults. On May 25, 2022, at the Ven City People's Cemetery, a soft, late May drizzle fell. No one spoke. Only the steady rhythm of shovels wielded by police broke the silence. As the casket containing the unfortunate Anna Tran's body was lowered, after nearly 7 years lying silently beneath the cold earth, unnamed, unmourned, without a single stick of incense, Laura Tran knelt beside the small coffin.
Her face was gaunt, her trembling hand placing her daughter's photo on the lid. "My child," she whispered, her voice a raw, broken cry. "Finally, you are called by your rightful name." In the days that followed, public opinion erupted. The entire province of Nha An was shaken by the tragic chain of events revealed by the case. A young woman brutally murdered, not out of hatred, but due to the selfishness, pride, and cowardice of those who were once closest to her. A father, Michael Nguyen, once respected, chose to conceal a horrifying crime to protect his family's hollow honor. A young man, Thomas Huang, committed murder believing he would be protected, only to face the harshest legal punishment at a young age. Justice, though delayed, is never denied. In a seminar held after the case, Colonel Benjamin Hung addressed law students. "We, the police, can solve cases using professional methods, but there are some cases where the truth only emerges when the perpetrators themselves can no longer bear the crushing weight of their own conscience. If a single report had been made in 2015, perhaps that young woman would not have lain beneath the cold earth for nearly a decade. If the father had dared to face the truth, perhaps his son might have received legal leniency. But they chose silence, and that silence, sometimes, is even more cruel than the crime itself." The final verdict was then delivered. Death sentence for the crime of murder. 5 years imprisonment for desecration of a corpse. Ordered to pay 250 million Vietnamese dong in civil compensation to the victim's family. After weeks of deliberation, the court's final ruling left the room heavy with silence. The lesson left behind is profound. Love is not a reason to cover up wrongdoing. Honor cannot be built upon the blood and tears of the innocent. A murderer will be punished by law, but those who remain silent when they know the truth must also bear responsibility before the court of conscience and the law. In the end, it was not the brutality of the act alone that shocked the nation, but how easily signs of fear and danger were overlooked by neighbors, by police, by society at large. May Anna Tran's story not fade into silence, and may we learn before it's too late. For sometimes, the quietest cries are the ones we need to hear the most.